Okay. So let me unpause. As I've said when you were boggled with useless adverts, President Sunday videos are actually pretty concise and to the point. I've noticed. Oh, hex people with a crutch sticking. Yeah, it's true. So yeah, I kind of like the fact that the topical videos are sort of short and bam to the point. I may be going to be able to add some perspective from the Eastern European side. Nice intro music. So far, so good.
Like many terms of art in political science and sociology that have
Okay.
bled into popular discourse, the definition of the state given by Max Weber in his lecture turned essay, Politics as a Vocation, has been
Politics as a vocation. I really must read more of things. I've read a little bit of books, but I still feel that I have not really read quite nearly enough. And there's the perspective when it comes to these topics from Western European writers, and there's the perspective of Eastern European states that did not really exist at the time when much of the discourse was happening. So, from the perspective of Europeans, newly forming nationalities, the discourse was, what should we do? Should we form a state? Should we maybe just go and create communism? And what does it all mean for us, for the people that do not have our own country because they were part of Russia, Prussia, and Austria? I lack the proper attention span to read books. Well, maybe we should do some reading on stream or maybe audiobooks.
frankly completely and utterly butchered. Once the
Oh,
conclusion of a rigorous sociological account given in his much longer unfinished work, The Multi-Volume Economy and Society,
okay.
the popularity of this definition, combined with its deceptive obviousness, has made it a convenient foundation for political writers wanting to comment upon modern politics while not wanting to do the tedious work of establishing what it is that they are actually talking about.
Yeah, exactly. This happens so much that it's actually tedious. I think what President Sunday said right now is really can be really applied to our little drinking game when people just say Poland instead of the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. People just jump into topics without taking the time to research the topic that they're talking about. That's so true. So, what's the deceptively simple definition? I would like to
For
hear.
hacks like Ayn Rand, this allows them to make
Yeah, exactly.
refutations of more serious political thinkers by permitting a loose equivocation with things they more easily can interface with.
Thank you, Kali Mayus. Thank you for following me. But yeah, I think so. I think I'm going to have to go through the books, that President Sunday has sort of recommended one by one. You know, I've actually read more, interestingly enough, when it comes to the topic of the state. I've actually, at least recently, read a lot more about the state from the perspective of Eastern Europe.
With like government, so that, for example,
Yeah,
they can direct
government and the state are not exactly the same thing.
sloganeering against something like social welfare or social management
Yeah,
with the appearance of being the conclusion of rigorous theorizing.
exactly.
Even in the case of more respectable work, however, the willingness to use the Weberian definition of the state as a black box wreaks havoc. In The Dawn of Everything by David Wengrow and the late
Yeah, I really see this happening when it comes to. I know I keep going back to the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, but. Okay, we will wait a second for Ginger to come back to us. Yeah. And plus, Kalimayus, we must remember people really are having nowadays because people think how to. Well, I'm trying to formulate my thoughts in a coherent manner. People, I sometimes think that people think that a country cannot exist without being a nation state, if that makes sense, because we are surrounded. Welcome back, Ginger. because we are surrounded right now by nation states, people sort of take nation states for granted and then look at history and almost think that nation states had always existed. And because of that, they think the government is the same as a state. And the fact is that, for example, governments as organs, parts, existed before things like the nation states. We had composite states like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, But yeah, the government tends to be an organ of the state, that's right.
David Graeber, which I actually do highly recommend. They question whether it is significant that such a thing as a state in this sense emerged when it appears entirely possible to have such things as monarchs, aristocracies.
Yes! Yeah, President Sunday is just saying it right now, exactly. Yeah, great. Very good, really nice. He's basically saying what I was saying, that there were things before nation states,
Monarchs, aristocracies,
Yeah.
slavery, and extreme forms of patriarchal domination, or to maintain
Yeah.
complex irrigation systems or develop science and abstract philosophy without a state. Although
Exactly. I could not have said it better myself, I really like this video thus far. This is a video that speaks to me. The topic of this state is a topic that really speaks to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a whole bunch of books and things. Like, I'm going to read this. I don't think I have read this before. The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And
Graeber
then
just
do a
the
video.
fact that the state as it is conceptualized today doesn't apply in the past. Nonetheless,
Yes! Oh my God. This video is a godsend to me. Yes. The nation, especially the nation state as we know it today, does not apply to the past, and yet people really stubbornly, non-stop try to apply the concept to the past. And when people do that, they start calling the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, quote-unquote, just Poland, and then I have to drink because I make a drinking game out of it, and I'm already slightly drunk.
Here, that they gauge other community forms by it as if it was an active potentiality in all times.
Yeah.
In his book, The Origins of Political Order, Francis
Who's the author? Francis Fukuyama. Oh, interesting. I wonder who Francis. Do you mind if I take a little bit of a detour and we could maybe check this author out? Francis Fukuyama. Is this the person, Francis Fukuyama? Do you know him? Have you read anything from him? Have you read his book? Or is this the first time you've heard of him? Francis Fukuyama, born in 1952, so he's also almost the age of my mother. My mother is 3 years younger. Oh! Just thank you for subscribing to me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the subscription. It helps me a lot. It helps me in fighting off poverty. Yeah, thank you. Francis Fukuyama, Yoshihiro is the name. Yoshihiro is an American politician, scientist, political economist, international relations scholar, and writer. I wonder if he has done any sort of... He's mainly known for arguing that humans have reached the end of history. Oh, this is interesting. Of course, I do not quite agree with such a stance, I don't agree in such a thing as the end of history. Fukuyama is known for his book The End of History and The Last Man from 1992, which argues that the worldwide spread of liberal democracies and free market capitalism of the West and its lifestyle may signal the end point of humanity's social-cultural evolution and political struggle. Well, this is clearly not correct. Okay, this is clearly not correct. As we in 2022 can attest, this is not exactly how it all panned out, was it? And became the final form of human government. Yeah, I would say that this was not a very good prediction. An assessment met with criticisms, which I guess, yeah, I can see why. Yeah, I disagree with him as well. In his subsequent book, Trust, Social Virtues, and Creation of Prosperity, Trust, Social Virtues, Creation of Prosperity, he modified his earlier position to acknowledge that culture cannot be cleanly separated from economics. Well, fair enough. Fukuyama is also associated with the rise of neoconservative movement. Oh no, he's a conservative? Really? Oh no. Is Fukuyama a conservative? From which he has since distanced himself. Oh, okay. So basically he created the neoconservative movement and then he decided that it was cringe and he distanced himself. Okay. So I guess he sort of wised up to the movement. Fukuyama has been a senior fellow at the Freeman Spalk Institute for International Studies. But President Sandhi says that one of his books seems to be The Origins of Political Order, that this seems to be a book worth checking out, so maybe I will check it out. From pre-human times to the French Revolution, ambitious book.
Fukuyama finds it sufficient to attribute to China the first creation of a, quote, modern state in the terms defined by Max Weber, unquote.
Okay.
There are a couple.
Like the person from the video that we've just saw said that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was one of the first modern states, but the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a modern state in a totally different way than a nation state of today. This is very important.
Of problems with this sentence, one of which being that while this definition is most strongly associated with Max Weber, the phrasing as such is not actually his invention. This is surprisingly taken note of in Wengrow and Graeber's book, The Dawn of Everything. But most important for our purposes, this naive onboarding of a simple definition as if it simply satisfied the need of a theoretical account of what the state actually is obscures much of what motivated that definition in the first place, allowing
what motivated it?
Fukuyama to explain the emergence of the state by reference to practical developments that fit the definition in its impoverished popular form, i.e. in terms of its language, but don't actually deal with the same subject in substance. My purpose in this video isn't to do a deep critique of any of the aforementioned authors, all of which provide...
I actually assumed that the purpose of the video was not a critique of the authors themselves. The use and abuse of the Weberian state. Like, I have made a whole drinking game today out of the abuse of the nation-state narrative, so I wonder if this video will ultimately go in a similar direction. It could, but it could not.
Extremely useful, if flawed, introductions to political thought. But to provide you with a clearer idea of what Weber was doing with his understanding of the state, so that you don't fall prey to the same error, because
True, I don't want to pray.
It's ubiquitous. Almost everybody makes it. Pursuant to that end, the first...
I know the pain of noticing mistakes that almost everyone makes.
Order of business will be to get the definition right.
Okay.
Because it's actually quite a bit more complicated than just a flat declaration that, quote, the state has a monopoly on legitimate violence within a territory, unquote.
Yeah, right.
In fact, as we shall see, that phrasing taken by itself is in fact quite incorrect on Weber's analysis.
Right.
Here is the full quote.
I mean, to be fair, like monarchies sort of had monopolies on violence, right? If you think about it.
Quote, if there existed only societies in which violence was unknown as a means, then the concept of the quote-unquote state would disappear. In that event, what would have emerged?
There exist only societies in which violence was unknown as a means, then the concept of the state would disappear.
Emerged is what, in this specific meaning of the word, we might call anarchy. Violence is, of course, not the normal or the only means available to the state. That is undeniable. But it is the means specific to the state. and the relationship of the state to violence is particularly close at the present time.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, the use of physical violence by widely different organizations, starting with the Klan, was completely normal. Nowadays, in contrast, we must say that the state is the form of human community that, successfully, lays claim to the monopoly of legitimate physical violence within a particular territory. And this idea
Okay.
of territory is an essential defining feature. For what is specific to the present is that all other organizations or individuals can assert the right to use physical violence only insofar as the state permits them to do so.
Right.
The state is regarded as the sole source of the right to use violence. Hence, what politics means for us is to strive for a share of power or to influence the distribution of power, whether between states or between the groups of people contained within a state.
Okay.
Unquote.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's unpack this. This is pretty interesting.
First, this understanding of the state places it past a particular point in history.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Hence, only nowadays, by contrast, we must
Yeah. Oh, my dad owns a dealership. Nice. Nowadays, in contrast, we must say that the state is the form of human community that successfully lays claim to the monopoly of legitimate physical violence. I think this was a little bit different than the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth,
say that the state is
since the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was sort of like the nobles were in charge of the country per se, but each of them had their own little lands, their own private armies.
a form of human community that successfully lays claim to the monopoly of legitimate physical violence.
Okay.
Whereas, quote, in the past, the use of physical violence by widely different organizations was completely normal, unquote.
Yeah.
It is a recent situation that forces us to speak of the state in this way.
Yeah.
Other ways of describing the state have preceded it that do not abide by the criteria Weber sets forth here.
Right.
Second, while violence is not the only or even the normal means available to the state, it is the, quote, means specific to the state, unquote, so that, quote, if there existed only societies in which violence was unknown as a means, then the concept of the state would disappear. In that event, what would have emerged is what, in this specific meaning of the word, we might call anarchy, unquote.
Okay.
There is a hidden significance in
I was making reference to Aqua de Niagara-Falls. Oh.
this that Weber only hints at in this passage. It is not simply the case that Weber calls that in the world which happens to lay claim to a monopoly of legitimate physical violence within a given territory the state, but that for there to be such a thing in the first place implies much more than the bare fact of some community or other in some place or other happening to be organized in such and such a way.
Right.
Thirdly,
Okay.
Weber specifies legitimate physical violence as that over which the state successfully claims a monopoly. Other means are
Okay.
available to the state, Weber insists, but violence is the means specific to the state,
Specific
and
to
the
the
state
state,
is
right.
defined by successfully laying claim to a monopoly over a specific kind of violence,
Right.
legitimate physical violence.
Mhm.
All states share a common and specific mode of interacting with the world and with each other, that is, violence.
Right.
And what makes them states and not some other violence-wielding entity of which there are many, is that this violence is legitimate.
Right.
Thus, even though within any space 1,000 little acts of violence may be taking place within and across borders between individuals, between families, between
That it's not like violence done by the state, right?
classes, between companies, between
Right.
cults, etc., when we discuss states, we are discounting all of them, but
Yeah,
those which
that's
wield
right. We do not discuss such. Oh, hello, prisoner. Thank you for following.
legitimate violence.
I like it so far.
This is what permits states, despite their complex and multifaceted organizational structures, cultural peculiarities, and porous relationships with individuals and organizations belonging to other states, to be mapped externally as simple two-dimensional shapes with a clear inside and outside.
Right.
Which is why, fourthly, this idea of quote-unquote territory is an essential defining feature of the state.
Right, that's fair. Although, again, the Polish, we have different types of states, right? The nation state, the composite state, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a composite state, which means, I will show you right now. I keep going back to this topic because it's like my favorite topic right now. I keep reading a lot of books about it. But you will understand when I show you how it looked like on the map, right? This is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as it was on the map, right? I'm going to show you. See, let's watch this map. I thought it was pretty good, yeah. I thought it taught me things I didn't know as well as corrected errors I've noticed on this topic in online political commentary, right? So look at this map. This is the map of Europe when the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth still existed. This part was basically Lithuania, and this part was basically the Kingdom of Poland. There were two entities that were sort of combined into one while still being two separate entities, the Kingdom of Poland and the Great Duchy of Lithuania. So they had single borders, but also remained two separate entities, if that makes sense. And that made it a composite state. Does that make sense? And it was very different from a nation state because there was no nation identity, there was no Commonwealth nationality, if that makes sense. Okay? Does that make sense? Do you think that makes sense, what I just said? Does that make sense to you?
Because the thing that Weber fixes on when he refers to the state is not simply a form of human community that might be adopted in any time and place so long as a single group of people has the wherewithal and the resources and the idea to set one up, but a cell within a world order of discrete...
Yeah, that's right. Because I have so many topics to cover with you. I have so many nice segments, so many nice topics to do. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
monopolies of legitimate physical violence.
Such as the burden of being the biggest transgender Polish creator, you know?
As explained more robustly in his much larger multi-volume work, Economy and Society.
Economy and Society.
States for Weber.
I really want to write down the titles and read these books one by one.
Are institutions. That is, they are, quote, organizations whose statutes can, within a given domain, be relatively successfully imposed on all whose action has a specified character, unquote.
This is actually really interesting because, yeah, you're at least in the top 3 biggest transgender Polish political streamers. It's true, prisoner, it's true. Some people say that the biggest one is Vosh, you know. Interestingly enough, my grandfather was a professor of law, and he also wrote a definition of a state in his introductory textbook to law. Interesting little trivia. My grandfather also wrote like a definition of the state when he wrote a beginner textbook for law students. I think the definition of a state was like, I have to remember it, and I'm gonna try to remember it from, but I'm pretty sure that it was a organization that claims domain over a certain territory. This basically is what I remember to the definition to be: an organization that claims domain over a certain territory. Was the important part of the definition was that it was an organization, you know? But I have to find the book and actually properly translate it, because I might be giving you an incorrect definition based on how I remember it. It has been a really, really long time since I've seen that book. Okay, I might look it up right now in order to... Okay, I'm not going to look it up on stream because Doxerino. I might dox myself by doing so, but I'm gonna look at it on a second browser. I wonder if there are any fragments. I wonder if there are any fragments of the book on the internet focused on combining the theory of law with the theory of economics. That was his the thing that he did. Okay, let me just say this. I will look for the book, and when I read the definition as he wrote it and translate it, I will write it for you on the President Sunday Discord, okay?
Since the domain in question is a monopoly over a particular kind of activity, this means that multiples of these institutions cannot coexist within the same physical space. Literally, by definition. Where the range of one institution's ability to deploy legitimate physical violence ends and another begins, there the line is drawn between one state.
This is actually interesting because technically speaking, if you have a composite state, doesn't it mean that you have several of those institutions in one space, technically speaking?
This means that multiples of these institutions cannot coexist within the same.
Basically speaking, in a composite state, that is the case, no? Could you not make that argument?
Same physical space. Literally.
I really wonder about that.
Where the range of one
what do you think? Does the composite state break that rule? Don't you have several of these institutions in one quote unquote one space? Technically speaking, one space, but the one space is built out of multiple spaces, kind of.
Ability to deploy legitimate physical violence ends and another begins. There the line is drawn between one state's territory and that of another. By legitimate is meant something very specific.
One state made out of multiple states, so to speak.
An order enjoys legitimacy.
Okay, I see.
If it has the prestige of being considered exemplary or obligatory.
Yeah, I think so as well. Because other forms of state exist, right? When you have a union of different organizations that agree to cooperate together to create a bigger country. Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair.
By being...
I don't think President Sunday believes that we have reached the end of history either, right? And he has discussed the author of The End of History as well.
Considered exemplary or obligatory, the chance that action will be oriented to this order increases, and so legitimacy orients the forces within a state in such a way as they supply the outwardly directed pressure that maintains the distinct lines that separate individual states.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, this legitimacy is not merely incidental to Weber's understanding of the state, it is identical with it. Because even though this legitimacy is internally defined, by giving shape to the state by supplying the outward-facing pressure to differentiate it from its rivals, it also defines the state externally, and in turn is validated by the counter-pressure of other states.
Of course, I have discussed this on the history video before, but I think it's worth reminding all of you, okay? I will remind all of you. The complicated situation of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. When the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth existed, it was a single composite state that was made out of Kingdom of Poland and the Great Duchy of Lithuania. It had no nations, it had no national identity, and it was a social status state of sorts that people defined themselves on by what class they belonged to. So you could be a noble, you could be a Jewish person, which was a class on its own, you could be a peasant, and you could also be a member of the city, a burgher. Burgher, is that how you call it? Is that how you call a citizen of the city in English? A burgher. But yeah, you could be that. And then, when Austria, Russia, and Prussia partitioned the Commonwealth between themselves, something interesting happened. The peoples that made up the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth each developed their own nation identity. Okay? So Polish people, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, I think Belarusians as well, they have all developed their own national identity. Yeah, I am Polish Jewish. That's right. And of course, there were Jewish people in the mix, which made up the biggest Jewish community in the world. And the problems began that the Commonwealth was a shared space for the citizens of the Commonwealth, and once the separate groups started creating their own national identities, they have all claimed ownership over certain parts of land as a part of their newly formed nation states, which created a lot of conflict after World War over what should be a part of Poland, what should be a part of Lithuania, what should be a part of the newly formed Ukraine, what should be part of Belarus. You see, this was a very painful transition from a unified composite state that was partitioned between the hostile countries, and then the newly formed nation states that claimed ownership over the parts that used to be a part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they said, this part belongs to us because it's like part of Poland or part of Ukraine, etc. Does that make sense? You know? And it created a lot of conflict. This is why after World War I, Lviv, I think everybody here... Oh, okay. I think everybody here knows what Lviv is, right? Lviv. Lviv, after World War I, was mainly populated by Polish people. So Poland said Lviv or Lviv is our city. It will be part of Poland. But all the outskirts of the city and all the land around it was mainly populated by Ukrainians. Okay? Which means that the Ukrainian people said, no, this area will be part of the newly formed Ukrainian state. And this caused a war to erupt between Poland and Ukraine in 1918 and 1919, which ended in Poland winning and taking Lviv and its surrounding territories as part of Poland. It's all very, very complicated and, has caused animosity between the people of Poland and the people of Ukraine. Okay? Makes sense? Nefesh. Okay, nice. So far, so good? Makes sense?
The same. Legitimate physical violence is not only validated by being treated as exemplary or obligatory by peers who similarly wield it, these peers are also constituted themselves as peers by the fact of that wielding.
Okay.
Thus, Weber here speaks not only of the state as a kind of thing, a kind of community that may exist in the world.
Right.
He implies also necessarily a total world order corresponding to it.
I see.
The world order to which Weber was speaking when he wrote his famous definition of the state, as that which successfully lays claim to the monopoly of legitimate physical violence within a territory,
Okay.
is oriented around, again, a particular kind of violence.
Right.
That
Sort
wielded
of.
by territorially exclusive institutions that are identifiable as such quite literally by the bare fact that they are physically successful in excluding competition from operating similarly within their staked out space. You will have noticed by now the brutal circularity here. The conditions for being a state are what set the conditions for being a state. The reason the Weberian state seems to be pulling itself up by its own bootstraps is because the significance of Weber's definition lies not in the content of the state concept itself,
Right.
but in the broader order that necessitates it and which it
Okay.
necessitates.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, the situation in which violence disappears as a means, that which supplies the force which gives shape to the constituent parts of this order, is not one in which new kinds of state appear, but one of anarchy.
Right.
It is the order as a whole, the world system of states, that is implied by Weber's definition. And in the absence of this, we need entirely different concepts to accurately represent political reality.
Why? Yeah.
The Weberian state is a part of a system that is only possible in modernity because
Right.
it is part of a modern system.
Yes.
And any theorist who tries to use it as a model for political organization prior or without this system's emergence
Yes, and people do it all the time. I'm so frustrated. I made a drinking game out of this today, and I'm drunk right now because people do it all the time. Like, I'm so glad. I'm so happy for this video.
go in total error.
Yeah, they do.
As always, thank you for
And
listening.
yet they stubbornly do it, which makes me mad. I'm gonna like this video. I'm gonna comment, okay? I'm gonna comment on this video. Because this is so true. Okay, let's write the comment together. Lucy, I know what you mean. It's frustrating when people treated the state concept back in time. Yeah, this is actually a concept that I have read in books written by historians, you know, this interesting concept that after the emergence of especially nation states, countries basically took the concept of nation states and decided to interpret all of the history of the kingdoms before to fit the nation state narrative. History has been retrospectively rewritten to fit the nation state narrative, and it is very, very important to study history while keeping this in mind. You know, this is very important part of learning history correctly, I might add, you know. Lucy super likes this video. Lucy is always frustrated by how people stubbornly what's the word? Insist. How do you write insist? I think this, okay. On retrospectively imposing the, can you help me? The imposing the, yeah, insist. Insist the imposing the modern definition of the state on to history that had happened before its emergence, modern state. Yeah, is that comment good? Is this a good comment? Is this a good comment? What do you think of the historical examples? Yeah, do you like this comment? Do you approve of this message? Is this, okay, we're gonna write this. We're one of the first to comment. I think we are comment number 16. Okay. I want to watch this response to Wicked Supreme because it recommends some really good books.
Apparently, Wicked Supreme has written up some thoughts on our last two debates. I was pleasantly surprised to see that these were in fact genuine reflections, minus some deflections regarding his own role in guaranteeing that our exchanges were too hostile and suspicious to be productive. And so I will try to respond as if our previous interactions
I wonder if President Sunny is going to read out loud the thing.
not already color my impressions of his character and my own conduct during those debates, after a brief consideration of precisely why these interactions did so. I'm not going to recapitulate the sequence of exchanges that led to our two interactions because that would defeat my purpose for writing this response. I will just say that if at any point he imagined himself to be courting something that could ever approximate to a good faith conversation when he thirstily tried to depict me as dishonest and cowardly in public prior...
President Sandy, that's my name. I am here to occupy with prior engagements this Friday coming, my good sir. Thursday it is. I have class all day Thursday. Then you'll be so ready. I'm free tomorrow night. And not for the aforementioned reasons. If you need more time, I can fit you next week. Okay, I'll let you know you're backing out, lol. That's what you're doing. I'm giving a wide range of days.
...to and in between each of our two exchanges, he was under a very deep misperception. Had he approached me in good faith, by which I mean, had he been willing to negotiate terms without using external social...
I want to approach President Sandy in good faith. Oh, well, we're sort of already, Sammy have agreed to speak. Okay, oh, wow. What do you think I should talk with President Sandy about? Should we talk about the state and the history of the state and the emergence of the state? Should I prepare for a talk about the emergence of nationalities and nation states in Eastern Europe? Is this what I should prepare myself to talk about with President Sandy? Would you be interested in listening to a discussion about this topic?
...to strong-arm me into an exchange where external circumstances hindered my ability to present my own side effectively. I repeatedly stated, for example, that
there are 3 big topics that I can, technically speaking, talk about, right? I can speak of my favorite topic, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and then the emergence of the nation-state in Eastern Europe. This is the one thing that I can talk about. I can also talk about trans issues. That's definitely something I can talk about. And I can also talk about the rise of the right wing in Poland and how the right wing basically parrots a lot of the right-wing trends from the US. This actually might also prove to be an interesting topic of discussion, or we could just rotate between these 3 topics. Like, I've listed you 3 topics. Which one of these is the most interesting to you? That's kind of like a good question, I think.
For reasons that my audience by now is well aware of. And had he treated our exchanges while they were occurring as conversations rather than domination routines for the benefit of an incurious audience, once again at multiple points he interjects to say, I sound as if I'm about to cry, and to ask, are you okay?
You sound like you're
I'm about to cry. I'm not okay.
gonna piss yourself. Are you okay?
But I'm not gonna piss myself. Don't worry about that one. I'm not gonna piss myself. But I'm not okay.
We might have had a very productive, perhaps even pleasant back and forth.
I want to have a pleasant back and forth.
Instead, we had to play a game of trying to maneuver each other to make the other look bad for an audience. All this to say, again, if a good faith interrogation of the issues was what Wicked Supreme really wanted, he did everything in his power to make that impossible. There is a bad habit many fall into where, when presented with a binary, they reflexively and uncritically accept the binary as true and locate all meaningful nuance to litigations between them.
Right.
For example, a child is told that communism is the opposite of capitalism.
Yeah, that is not exactly true, because technically speaking, within literature, capitalism is like a step towards socialism, and socialism is a step to communism, right? Is that correct?
Communists believe in collective ownership, while capitalists believing in owning what you produce and buy for yourself, and therefore grows up to believe simplistically that the real stakes involved in debates between critics and advocates for capitalism are whether everybody gets to own their own toys or not. Alternatively, one asks whether one has the right to use lethal force to defend one's property in a conversation about whether or not a particular act has moral sanctions such that defending it doesn't bear additional implications for one's normative loyalties.
Right.
This might seem like a straightforward question if one assumes that all these things are simply and obviously understood in a common way by each party.
Right.
But if they are not, however, then it may be the case that by answering with a simple yes or no, even though this might progress the conversation forward more fluidly, it might also have the effect of burying a particularity in one's own meaning that bears serious implications for the significance of the answer.
Right.
Are we saying
I
that
mean,
one has
that
a right
makes sense, right?
to defend one's property in the context of the law of a specific state? That it is absolutely a given that in any case where one believes that one's possessions are threatened,
Of
that one
course,
is
since I'm like a soy girl, I'm the queen of soy, I'm always gonna sort of lean in the direction of saying that a person's life is worth more than property. That property can be rebuilt, even if I'm gonna be branded as like weak SJW. Property can be rebuilt. You can, even if certain items seem irreplaceable, at the end of the day, you can replace them. And since we still have not found a way to bring someone back from the dead, life is, as far as we know right now, truly irreplaceable when compared to property, okay?
thereby
As
licensed.
long as you are alive, you can get back property that you've lost. And when you lose your life, it's all over. Definitely, forever. So, in that sense, I think a life is worth more than property,
Deployed
if
lethal
that makes sense. If this sort of quote unquote analysis of worth is makes sense.
force. For that matter, what does it mean for something to be one's property? If property is not understood in a way that makes the analogy or the statement commensurate with the event one is attempting to litigate about, permitting the meaning of these terms to go uninterrogated buries one's actual position in favor of the one held by the one who asked the question, and who incidentally stacked the decks by loading it in his terms as if these were unproblematic.
True. This is like what I like going through the quote unquote hypotheticals, especially the yes no hypotheticals can be like not really that useful to create like a useful conversation, if that makes sense. It's basically, if I were to say it simply as President Sunday say, that it's just for the sake of moving the conversation forward fluidly and scoring points, right? Especially when it's like in a purview of a debate.
Similarly, in his reflections, Wicked Supreme floats two explanations for why he thinks communication failed between us. The first is that I was simply avoiding engagement with him by being a pedantic snob. The
Okay,
second
well,
is
wait.
that I've lost the
He
ability
was being a pedantic snob and refusing to work to understand me in an effort to simultaneously dick wave and avoid engaging. Even if this isn't the case, there was still obviously a ton of bad faith from him, making it totally plausible. Well, to be fair, it is a very common thing in discourse and in communication that people do not really take enough pains to try to understand the other side, right? He's actually
to translate
He's actually had his nose in the books for so long and has been disconnected from normies for so long that his understanding of theory has completely reshaped his worldview and has lost the ability to translate. We may use the same terms but might as well be speaking different languages with numeric memes. Plausible evidence by the fact that even in his most casual he still talks like a effing goober. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you which one is more likely. Well, if the second thing is true, then the easiest way to navigate through this, yeah, I think it's a bit silly as well. Because if you are having a problem with communication, then this is where, questions come in, right? What do you mean by this? What are you trying to say by this? What, in your opinion, does the term X mean? Imagine saying this about literally any field of study. Yeah, that's right. I know. Like, if someone has read a lot, then it's worth asking them additional questions, right? To get to know more. Like, what do you mean by self defense? What do you think we are talking about when we are talking about self-defense. What do you mean by property? What do you mean? It's some things like that, yeah, getting into things. Like, yeah, clarifying questions. Like, making it even maybe a bit less about you, and for a second making it about the other person, because Wicked Supreme kept saying, right? I want to know what your values are. He kept saying that. So there's a way of getting to know someone's values. Tell me what you mean when you say self-defense. What is your view on these issues? Maybe this is what I should do when I talk to President Sunday. Maybe I should sort of do a display of how a more sort of fruitful conversation about people's values can look like, less confrontation and less actual, and more actual learning of the other person's values. What do you think? Maybe this could be like the topic of our conversation when we speak eventually. Like, I've given you 4 topics of our eventual talk. So you can write in the chat which one you would like the most to see.
My thoughts into terms understandable to a lay audience because my
One
notes
of them seems pretty interesting.
have been in the books for too long. He
Like,
does
how
not
can you
consider-
be in the books for too long? Like, I've started reading more intensely lately, and I still feel that I'm missing so much. I'm actually pretty insecure about it. That I still think that I'm missing so much when it comes to the topics that I really want to discuss on stream. Like, this is actually a pretty tricky thing when you try to make your content about empirical knowledge, right? How much do you need to be in the books until you can start talking about a thing confidently? Maybe asking questions and trying to lay out topics a bit better would be at least help the audience get a better feel for the things. Yeah, I think so. Like, maybe I could lay down a few topics before President Sunday, and then we could just choose what we want to talk about.
the
Could be,
possibility that the
one thing.
appearance of 1 and 2 are the result of the manner in which these interactions took place. By
Yeah,
invidiously insinuating that my attempts to problemize terms relevant to
Right.
the discussion was me being Weasley, and that my preference to set the conversation at a slightly later date for purposes of preparation demonstrated that I was attempting to flee the exchange.
I mean, preparation is pretty important, right? It is pretty important to be rested and prepared.
Wicked Supreme made it so that I could not engage with him in a conversation. To attempt such would be naive.
Yeah.
Had I persisted in treating our interactions as good faith conversations when nothing about their framing or their manner would suggest that they were, in fact,
Right.
quite the opposite, I'd still have failed to have a conversation, which is nonetheless what I was still attempting to do when I was attempting to give reasons for why I can't just naively accept the terms of
Yeah.
Wicked Supreme's hypotheticals.
And the most, I'm not even directly involved in this whole Wicked Supreme President Sunday conversation and his video about centrists. I'm actually irritated by proxy by the fact that nobody seems to understand the argument that he made in this video. Everyone seems to interpret his argument as left wing equals when you are against any sort of order, and right wing equals when you are pro order, which is totally not the case. President Sunday has clearly said that left wing is the preparedness to critique and possibly exchange or topple existing structures, while being right wing is a fascistic, treating it as a sort of a fetish to absolutely non-critically believe in the structures as they are now. Like, this is not the same thing as being blindly pro or against something. Although you could say that being right wing is a bit of a blind pro. But the left wing is, as President Sunday argues, not being blindly against structures, but being able to critique them, because by extensions of that logic, if the structures would work fine, why would you be against them? You would be fine with them. If they worked for everyone, if there was just sort of like, let's say, social justice for everyone, no discrimination, why would you be against such structures? You would not. As a left-leaning person, you would be like, yeah, these structures work. They work, so they are okay. But you are open to criticize them should they not work and replace them if necessary, you know? Like, it implies a level of flexibility to the left wing that the people that comment on it do not give it, you know? So, yeah, exactly. They can be, for the structures, they withstand the critique. Like, this is a really frustrating, because people who critique the President Sunny video just sort of create a weird imagined version of what they think the argument is, and then they call it stupid, they call it silly, they say the President Sunday is ridiculous because he makes this made up argument, which is just not the case. People just really misunderstand what he's saying, which I'm finding hard to believe that they are doing it in good faith, because the way he explains it is pretty clear, and English is not even my native language, you know? Like, it's pretty clear how he explains it for anyone who is willing to listen to it.
As well as have been knocked about rhetorically by the little acts of performative condescension that
Like, this is so weird how people in their critique made it like some sort of a point against President Sunday that he's well read. Like, this is some high school, you're such a nerd level of energy. Like, this is so weird. You are well read, you are so in books that this somehow works against you as a point, because you know what you're talking about. This is so strange. Like, this is one of the weirdest criticisms against President Sunday that I keep hearing, that he reads so many books. Like, is this really a thing that you can point out as a flaw in someone? That they read a lot?
passes for rhetoric in these online circles.
This is so
The
strange.
mistake on my part, the main mistake that is,
Okay.
was acknowledging the initial taunts that instigated the exchanges that led to these debates in the first place.
Right.
There was
Fair
no
enough.
practical purpose, and there could be no hope of a productive interaction.
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
conditions.
I think that's right. And it kind of only ended in people creating millions of videos crying and laughing and mocking President Sunday.
Being said, despite Wicked Supreme's evading responsibility for his own behavior during and outside of our debates in his reflections, I respect very much the attempt to seriously grapple with the radical difference in approach to these topics that he was
Right.
presented with during them, and his acknowledgement that he has work to do to improve his abilities in this area.
Okay.
I also recognize that there is a deceptively steep learning curve and a lot to unpack involved in
Yeah.
educating oneself to the point that one is able to navigate these questions lucidly.
Maybe before our talk with President Sunday, I should try to read at least the parts of these books, and I should sort of have a conversation about that. So many
Precious.
things.
So to the end of collaborating and
uh,
assisting each other and increasing our mutual
Wow.
understanding, assuming that that's what we both truly want to do, I have the following suggestions for Wicked Supreme and anyone else interested in exploring these topics more critically, to look into the following sources which I have selected for their brevity, clarity, and scope. Reading these carefully, it shouldn't take more than a few months at most, will provide a major advantage in critically addressing the issues we touched on during our debate. First, Indian Migration and Empire by Radhika Mongia. Read this for an unpacking of methodological assumptions about the need for borders as population filters, for the emergence of nation-states and liberal conceptions of
Oh,
property
this
and
is really good.
subjectivity.
This is good.
as well as a critical and extremely in-depth account of the emergence of the modern system of states. Next, Walt's modern system of states, subjectivity, as well.
Radhika Mongia. We're gonna look at the authors. We're gonna look them up, okay? Radhika Mongia. You're gonna look up the. Oh, okay. I don't think there's any one of these people is the author. Okay. Born in 78. Actually, pretty young author. She's pretty interesting. Very. Oh no, this is Atal Mongia. This is not the person. Wait, what's the name? Radhika Mongia. I cannot find a wiki. If you can find a wiki on this person, and is this the person? I think this is the person. Associate Professor. Feminist Marxist and Post-Colonial Theory, Political and Historical Sociology, Study of Translational and Global Processes. I think this is the person. I'm pretty sure this is the person, right? I think this might be the person. Vosh. This is Vosh.
As well as a critical and extremely in-depth account of the emergence of the modern system of states. Next, Walled States Waning Sovereignty by Wendy Brown. Read this for an overview on the development of historical conceptions of sovereignty.
Of course, this is all from the Western perspective, so I would like to dig out some books like written in Polish from the perspective of Eastern Europe, because I think this might add a little bit of like a, well, you know, an interesting perspective, right? From a different part of the world where the emergence of the nation state happened very differently than in other parts of the world, right? I think this could add quite a different and interesting perspective, right? I think so.
Right to determine when the normal state of things has been upset, so that the law may be broken to preserve it.
Don't you agree?
Next, Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott. Read this for an account of how the bureaucratic scientific structure of the modern state systematically homogenized.
See, this is actually the bureaucratic, while we're talking about the bureaucratic, this is very interesting because in ages past, China used to be a highly bureaucratic country, which is attributed because China was very advanced when it comes to inventions and many other things, and its extremely stringent and strict bureaucracy is actually, interestingly enough, contributed as the factor why the modern day scientific method did not have the chance to emerge in China when it was sort of like a highly, you know,
homogenizes the things within its domain. The state systematically homogenizes the things within its domain. Scott. Read this for an account of how the bureaucratic scientific
bureaucratic country. Yeah, I was looking for the word bureaucratic. Yeah, you know, that's like, when China was so bureaucratic that it actually stifled certain, the emergence of certain scientific methods, if that makes sense, you know? This is really, really interesting. I have read a book from a very interesting, there's in Poland, there's this series of scientific books with the sign of infinity, the so-called Infinity series. And one of the books was called Why the Scientific Method Has Emerged in Europe. And the author explains that the emergence of the scientific method, it's not just a thing that brilliantly happened in Europe. It's the culmination of many different things that happened historically all over the world, the mixing of those things, and that just Europe happened to be in the right time, in the right circumstance for all those little pieces from all over the world to come together and create the scientific method, that many different pieces were created all over the world throughout history, and the circumstances of the formation of the cities, etc., allowed for those pieces to come together and create the scientific method. So basically, the creation of the scientific method in reality is not a thing of Europe, but the combined effort of the entire world. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Middle East. Yeah, Arabic philosophers. Yeah, refined, developed, yeah, exactly. It was also actually mentioned in the book. Many things. Yeah. So the modern day scientific method is not an European idea. It's more like a culmination of many different ideas and methods developed all over the world, which is pretty interesting, right? You could call it a global effort that culminated in a single place in the world. But the author sort of argues that if the circumstances would be different, the culmination of the efforts of the entire world could have borne fruit anywhere else. That it could have basically happened anywhere else. Which is true. Which is absolutely true.
Scientific structure of the modern state systematically homogenizes the things within its domain to produce a simulated world that, while functionally legible enough for its purposes, severely restricts our ability as thinking human beings to conceptualize things in ways that are more accurate and particular, if less conveniently for state administration.
So
In addition to these, the following are highly recommended as essential background.
It literally is the culmination of many different perspectives, which makes it which makes it very fascinating and interesting in my mind, that the whole world had like a sort of hand in creation of it.
Development of liberal political philosophy. Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. The Second Treatise on Government and the Letter Concerning Toleration by John Locke. The Discourse on the Arts and Sciences and the Discourse Concerning Inequality by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Science as a Vocation and Politics as a Vocation by Max Weber. And The Concept of the Political by Carl Schmitt.
Okay.
As always, thank you for listening and take care.
Very nice. This was a very nice video.